Hey, this is Todd. It's been a minute. I'm broadcasting from my secret above ground bunker in the hills. Let me get a little piece of fuzz. Oops, I missed it. Fuzz. No, still missed it. Fuzz from the camera. There we go. We didn't play a game this week, just scheduling as tends to happen, even with only three of us. Still find scheduling to be a problem. I guess that is the just the way the state of gaming is these days, particularly online, but even offline, can't get time to get the fellas together. In any case, I was behind, or I am behind, with the update from the game we did play last week, so let me go ahead and tell you what happened. Where we left off is the crew had revealed a shaft that was hidden beneath a statue in a room that they were in. They had summoned an earth elemental, and they had used the earth elemental to push away the statue. And as it had shoved it and sort of half slid it off the mount, they discovered the hole. This week was all about them exploring down there. Not a lot of combat, though there was there was one, I guess one full out combat and one almost worked out more like a trap kind of combat, but I'll get into that down the line. Their first problem was getting down the shaft, which I actually didn't think would be a hard thing to do. They probably made it, which often happens with players, including myself as a player. Sometimes you make work harder than it is, so it was very rough. I tried to establish it was very rough-hewn sort of shaft, and it would have been fairly easy to just use, just kind of grab your way down. But they worked out this whole other thing. So the elemental just used kind of its earth move, just touched the kind of raw rock and just came out at the bottom. Then they had the great idea of having the earth elemental hold the 10-foot pole they had over its head, so that they could kind of slide down the pole to get down to the bottom. But it was just deep enough so that the pole was kind of a foot or two in the middle, kind of down. So I think it was Grusty had to kind of sort of jump into it and kind of hold on to it. And I also try to let him know is that, hey, this is just a 10-foot pole, your usual trap finding 10-foot pole. It's not super strong. It's not like a staff. It's really just kind of maybe even a little bit flexible kind of stick of wood, because you're using it to kind of poke around. It's light enough that you can do that with kind of one-handed, and it's not tiring. It's not necessarily meant to be a fireman's pole. And one of the things and maybe the lesson that I like to take from this is I always like to have the players really work out what they're going to do. In this case, they had this kind of rough outline of a plan of, okay, easy. He'll go to the bottom, hold the pole, we'll just jump down and slide on the pole. And my thing is like, well, let me kind of go into the details here. And I'm not trying to make it difficult on them, but I'm trying to get them to kind of think through and see where things are and see where the challenges, if there are any, are going to be, so that when we do this whole thing at the end, I say, okay, now there's this little gap. You're kind of going to have to sort of launch into it and maybe keep your balance and not go banging off of things and not breaking the pole. So that's going to be what you're rolling for. Now I've established that it's their opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe this plan's not what we wanted to do. That would be maybe number one. B, here's how I can figure out how to get around that so that we don't have to make that roll. Or C, I understand now, I'm going to make this roll. Just helps inform everybody of what the situation is, what's at stake. So we understand, okay, if I miss this, what happens? If this happens, what's the consequence? We all can kind of be on the same page of, okay, so if I kind of fall, sort of slide myself out, and I somehow miss or I don't grab onto the pole, what happens to me? Well, I kind of have to understand, okay, I don't have the pole. I'm going to maybe bang into the far side of this shaft, and I'm going to fall down the almost 20 feet to the bottom. Or, okay, if I grab the shaft, but, it's being held by the earth elemental, it's not cemented into the floor, it's moving around, maybe it snaps, then maybe the next guy, I'm going to make it down okay, but the next guy's not going to make it, and I have to come up with another opportunity. So by having them talk it through, and I'm not trying to take away any kind of rule of cool things, but I just feel like, talk it out, come to that understanding of, okay, we all understand, we all see the picture of what's happening. Then when rolls are made or rolls are missed, you don't end up in a situation in which happens sometimes. As a DM, I have an idea of the good and the bad of this plan, the players may have a different idea. So then a roll is made, and a roll, particularly on failure, I all of a sudden go, okay, you tumble 30 feet down, roll this for damage, and the player's going, whoa, 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 wait, I thought X, Y, and Z. So we kind of try to talk it out. So we talked out that through. He ended up making the roll, so he gets down. But the funny part is that then Atreides, he's not liking this pole idea. He's like, well, how much rope do we have left? So they do some calculations, and they have just enough rope to essentially drop a rope down. So he ties the rope and then drops it down. He's just able to climb down. So there was this whole, probably spent a good 20 minutes on figuring out the ins and outs of the sort of sliding down the 10-foot pole being held by the earth elemental, just to then have Atreides tie up some rope and drop that. So that was good. But then they were out of rope, so I understood that. So they get into this rough tunnel, and the tunnel's sort of heading, I think it was in a northeasterly type situation. I rolled for a random encounter while they were doing all of this work with the elemental and the pole and whatnot, and I came up with, I had to roll a couple times. I still am sort of just behind on my prep, so I hadn't made a particular random encounter table for this dungeon, so I was using the basic one. But there are a lot of choices in just the BX version of the random encounters that I didn't want, because this one I wanted it to be something where it was more or less stuff that was in here, either creatures or sort of undead, not like, oh, there's a gnome suddenly shows up, or oh, there's another adventuring party. I didn't want those to come up, so there were a couple times I had to re-roll it. So I ended up picking, or I think rolling, the giant centipedes, which I always am a fan of the giant centipedes. And I'm looking at one of these, I've been using a Dyson Logos map as the template for this, and of course it's very well done, it's wonderful, but there's no details there, right? So I'm looking at this, and I'm just trying to look at what are these little details that he has that I can turn into something. So I was trying to think about what are the relationships between essentially the well-made, constructed parts of this dungeon and also these rough, kind of hewn corridors. So my idea that I'm kind of imprinting into this was an established tomb that at least one party at one point dug into, either accidentally or on purpose, and then kind of dug some shortcuts through, in and out. So that's kind of what I have in my brain for, okay, these are what these things mean. So now they're going through this rough-hewn part, and then it's going to sort of then break out into another main part of the dungeon. And there was kind of I knew there was sort of a pool of water or a pool of liquid. It seemed to be indicated. Maybe it was something else, but I took it to be water, just some kind of murky water. And it makes sense that there'd be water around. This was originally, there was kind of a sort of a man-made quarry lake above it. The lake fell, maybe some water dripped down. So I had this thing about water dripping down. And I don't know if centipedes are aquatic. I think there's it was the movie and the book, The Naked Lunch. I think it talks about aquatic centipedes, but I don't know if William Burroughs made that up or whatnot, but whatever. I had the centipedes. They were kind of in the dark. They could hear them chittering and moving around, and then they kind of splooshed into this really dark pool of water that was kind of in the middle of, that was sort of in a sort of a depressed area of this intersection that they had. So they kind of had to go around this pool of water somehow, and that was kind of the little puzzly element. It's not a puzzle in the sense that I formally put it there, but it's just one of those environmental, it becomes a puzzle. You know that there are some kind of creatures, you don't know how many, you don't know how deep the water is in this pool. You know that the pool kind of covers a common area where there's a T-section. In this case, I think 4 different directions the passage ran after that. How do you get around it? They obviously were wary of the centipedes. They don't have a lot of their abilities left until they take some kind of rest period. So they are kind of running with what they have, and that's it. They were smartly decided, okay, let's send the elemental in first. So the elemental tromps into the water. The centipedes attack it, and I hadn't even noticed before, but the centipedes, I just hadn't looked, right? They don't actually do any damage in BX. I think it's just they can roll for poison, I think. Or I'm sorry, maybe that's the rats. I know the centipedes actually do damage. I don't remember, one of the two, because they fight rats too. One of the two really can't do any damage. It's just a matter of, do you get diseased? I'm trying to remember if it might be the centipedes or it might be the rats. I can't remember. In any case, I think it might have been the centipedes, because I remember thinking, oh, they can't really do anything to the earth elemental before at all, because it's immune to the disease or poison or whatever. So they're just kind of yip-yapping at it, and it just starts going. It smashes a couple of them. Grusty and Atreides join the battle. They're lucky enough not to be bitten, and they soon, they soon put down these 4. I think I had rolled up 4 giant centipedes in the water. Then they decided to turn one of the corners, which ends up going down some rough-hewn steps. And then I have it, again, this is where in the map, you have this rough-hewn area that meets with a very well-masoned area. So I, in my mind, I interpret it as here we have this kind of grave robbing or sort of later adventurer or later constructed rough passage breaking into this tomb area. And this is was a huge room. And and somewhere along the lines of the way, I think I had rolled for another encounter. I forget what transpired. Maybe think, okay, let's roll again. Had a bit of an interruption there. Sorry about that. But it did allow me to go and check if it was centipedes that indeed had no damage. And it was. I'd been using that wonderful resource to create or to generate the random encounters. And in that one, whoops, sorry about the camera move. In that one, the giant centipedes do no damage, but you have to roll for poison. So, of course, versus the elemental, there was no chance to poison it, so they were just wasting their attacks on its stone body until the other character showed up. But at that point, a few nice attacks got rid of them. But anyway, I think I had gotten past this. Gosh, I feel like this is just my memory's gone to mush sometimes. They had taken down the passage and went down some rough-hewn steps into a more finished, long kind of gallery-type room. And this one was a really long gallery and not much longer than was wide. I think it was maybe 30 feet wide and over 120 feet long. And where this passage broke into it was sort of at one end. And just in terms of the map, on the other side, not exactly directly, but directly a little bit angle, was another rough-hewn passage that's kind of breaking out again. So in this encounter, I had rolled some rats. Or in this area, I had rolled some rats. So they were kind of looking in the room. I kind of had it being dark, sort of dark, except for kind of where their lantern light was shining, and then otherwise kind of gray darkness. And they didn't seem to be too interested in the room itself. I think the fact that they were sort of low on resources was maybe impacting their decisions at this point, which frankly, I think they went a lot further, given that there are only 2 of them, even with the plus 1 with the elemental, right? That they had gone this far, being as low on resources as they are, really pushing their luck, which is nice to see, but of course dangerous for them. And they're looking at this room, and they decide to kind of make a break for it across the room. They seem to be less interested in really exploring this room than kind of getting past it. So it was just kind of fun where I just had these kind of rats just kind of nipping at them as they're leaping across. So when I said before about it turning into almost a bit of a trap, because really I think probably what it felt like to them is they're kind of running. They're running along through the darkness, kind of illuminated somewhat by the lantern light, these rats are kind of sort of leaping out of these blind spots and kind of nipping at them. I think I hit Atreides for 1 damage, and the one thing that's on my list to remember is I need to roll to see if he took poison from that. Other than that, they all made it across okay, and they decided to keep coming up this rough-hewn passage, came up to another big T section. They turned one way. I think they turned back towards their left. And this is where I'd have to sort of take in this Dice and Logos map, which is big, it's great, but it's not exactly adapted to the way I'm using it. So the way I was using it, they came in one passage that was sort of in a giant pit that had a chasm that had opened up almost like a cenote, but really it would have been one that's really deep. This shaft opened up from the ground, emptied out this lake, and that exposed this passage. Now they're kind of going up and out, and this came into another area, and I'm treating this like another exit. So they came up to an exit that was would have to be cleared of rubble, but was there for them. And it had some actually natural steps going up. So I feel like the math as far as how far they came down and then kind of went up, I felt like it kind of worked, at least roughly enough where they're not questioning why we started down, say, 20 feet down and now we're coming up at the surface. But it gave them this other exit. They had to clear it out. So I wasn't sure, well, are they going to clear it out? Whatever. I felt like they are thinking smartly. And, all full credit to them. But I always appreciate, I think as a GM, when you see your players taking the information that you've given them and thinking it through and coming to the logical decisions, always makes me feel good as a GM because I feel like I've given them all the information. Sometimes, and I will do this, if I feel like I hear them chatting something out and they clearly are missing some big piece of information, if it's something that I gave them that should be clear to them, I'm going to tell them. So in this case, they kind of reasoned it out, and I think rightfully are thinking, hey, look, we're low on resources, we've got this exit, we want to have another exit, so if something happens, we can come back this way, and we kind of know where we're coming out. I think they were concerned about where it was going to put them, so they cleared it out, and it's enough to get through. And it turned out that they were in another part of this quarry, because, again, this was a quarry that a lake had filled up, something had caused the ground to give way beneath the lake emptied, big pit, one entrance over there. This entrance was kind of another part of the quarry, basically at more or less ground level. So they emerged from it, and again, smartly, they decided to spend a little bit of extra time kind of camouflaging the entrance that they found. So they didn't just blow out all the material. They kind of dug their way out in a way that they could keep it a little bit subtle, sort of hide it a little bit. And the funny thing here was with the earth elementals, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to use the earth elemental to get down that initial shaft. All the things about, oh, can it do that? Oh, can it do that? They spent, I think, 3 hours manually digging it out as the earth elemental watched. So it's kind of funny the way those things work, right? This one I thought screamed, what can the earth elemental do to help us with all this loose rock and rubble? And the other one that seemed more like the obvious way was to just, use rope. And they spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to use the earth elemental for that one, and then for this one, they're doing it all by hand. So this is kind of funny, but this is what happens, right? You kind of... Anyhow, tilting my camera and the mic decided to slide out of the hot shoe and almost fell, but my cat-like reflexes was able to grab it. So anyway, those things tend to happen. They kind of make you lose your train of thought. Point being, sometimes you have this obvious tool in front of you and you don't think about it. The elemental was just holding the lantern while they're hacking away with the tools they had. But it didn't really matter. Some time passed. I rolled for a random encounter. Nothing came up. I think I might have rolled actually a couple times. Nothing came up. And so they got out back into the sunlight, back out in the quarry where they can regroup. There were a couple things I wanted to throw at them that had nothing to do with the dungeon, but they really leapt into the dungeon. And I've said this in one of the other write-ups. I'm not sure yet whether they went for the dungeon because they felt like I was pushing them to it. And I could see how they would think that. I just wanted to have it there as an option, although part of what they wanted to play with the old school kind of gaming was to do kind of old school kind of stuff. So I thought, well, I'll throw this out there, and it could be something that A, they decide to explore themselves, which they did, or B, which things can kind of come up out of there and affect the world, which they probably will. And then it would just kind of to be there, add a little element. But they might have felt like that. This, I was saying, big sign, go here, which wasn't really my intention, but I could see how they thought it was. Now they're going to have a chance to regroup. They had talked originally about it being kind of political and sort of high fantasy and having intrigue. So I'm going to start the next game session. The whole kind of premise was that they were starting to have sort of messengers, running messages back and forth for people. So I am going to give them a message to send. I have to roll to see whether, I think it was Atreides, got poisoned. And I think I'm going to do something to make these rats a little bit different, so it won't just be straight up poison. But I was thinking about just how are they surviving in this part of the tomb. And I had this idea that maybe they were just eating on sort of I was going to picture there were zombies around there. that they'd been eating the zombie flesh, and it's kind of a never-ending resource. If the zombies don't kill them and they eat the flesh, they get just kind of the zombie flesh just kind of, I guess it in some way kind of regenerates. It doesn't really lose it, or theoretically they could lose all the flesh and become a skeleton. I'm not sure how that works, but the idea is that eating that zombie flesh has done something to these rats. So I think I was gonna the poison was gonna be more like a mummy rot situation, and I will probably write up these rats maybe today if I have a chance, or in a couple days. So if you're interested in that, you can see that, and probably I'll, at least for the first part, I'll throw it up to patrons and supporters and that nature. But I'll probably do something with that. But now I get to kind of put them back out in the world. They can regroup. They can take a rest. They can get their abilities back. They can decide what to do, and then they'll have this other avenue of here's a task you could take on if you want to do that. And I won't, I couldn't put them under orders. Here, you must take this message here. I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to give them the choice. I'm going to say, hey, you could take on this task and take this message, or if you want to go back into the dungeon, you're welcome to go back into the dungeon, and we'll keep playing with that. So we'll see what they have to do. But they've got some possibilities, but they made their first full-fledged foray in and out of the dungeon. I think they did a heck of a job. I think they really pushed themselves. They didn't try to go for the one encounter adventuring day, right? We're going to hit one room, Nova everything, and then we're going to back out and rest for days. I felt like they really pushed themselves. They really took chances. I had no idea, I didn't create that shaft under the statue. That's totally from the Dice and Logos map. It wasn't something that I threw in there to reward them. But it was neat that they found it, because I wasn't thinking that they were going to. I thought they were just going to just kind of stick with this area. And they didn't. So I was really happy with that. So their first dungeon foray completed. They are both alive to tell the tale. I have not been... I haven't been pulling my punches as far as encounters. I've been rolling straight up what dice, if I'm rolling how many of something shows up, I'm just rolling the dice to see what they have. They've done an excellent job managing it. I think giving them that ability to have the elemental is nice, because it does give them some extra muscle. Eventually they'll get gold and stuff, and they'll be able to hire hirelings and do all that. But the elemental for them is, I think, it's been handy for them as kind of an instant hireling, so to speak. Though it does have its dangers, but they rolled. They did enough to get past it. But we'll see when we can play next. Hopefully, next Monday or Tuesday we'll get a game in it, and we'll see what direction they choose. I didn't have to do a lot of great decisions. I felt like we got a lot of game time in, but they spent a lot of time doing various plans and trying to figure things out, which is totally fine. So they didn't discover a whole lot lore-wise. I think what I'm thinking about in terms of lore is that there were basically two different tomb areas. The one small tomb they started in, and then a deeper one that's going to focus back on the lore of this town via giants and other things. It's going to be in those deeper levels. So we'll see if they get back into that, and I'll get to explore more of that, or we'll start kicking the politics and intrigue in motion, and we'll go that way. So we'll see what happens, but thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.
Express.